Why does NATO need a defector program to help Russian soldiers escape the war in Ukraine? People might think that the purpose of a defector program would be to save Russian soldiers. Though this would be a commendable goal, the real purpose of a defector program, in my opinion, is to help defeat Putin without increasing the risk of nuclear war. I'm Jim, a concerned citizen. Sun Tzu wrote, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." If there are Russian soldiers who don't want to fight in Ukraine, the best way to subdue them is to ask them not to fight. And if Russians themselves decide not to fight, the chances of the war escalating to nuclear weapons is much less. So why has NATO not set up a defector program? Perhaps people can't imagine how a defector program can help stop an invading army. In this video, I will suggest how NATO could use such a program to fight Putin without adding to the risk of nuclear Armageddon. I am not saying that a defector program could defeat Putin on its own, but it is a weapon that NATO should add to its arsenal. A defector program is potentially so potent and so much safer that I am surprised that NATO has not created one already. So I would like you to look at this video and let me know if you think a defector program is a crazy idea or something that NATO really needs to do. Defeating Putin militarily is dangerous. If Putin fears defeat, he might escalate to nuclear weapons to avoid losing, or he could drag the whole world down with him. However, letting Putin win is also dangerous. He might be tempted to start even more dangerous wars. A defector program could undermine Putin with less risk. So how much damage could a defector program do? I believe NATO has the capacity to allow every Russian soldier to defect if it wants to. It is hard to say exactly how many Russians are in Ukraine, but in September of 2023, Ukrainian intelligence estimated the number to be at least 420,000. There are 32 countries in NATO. 420,000 defectors, divided among 32 countries, works out to 13,125 defectors per NATO country. I think the average NATO country can handle this. So I have no doubt that NATO could cope with 420,000 of Putin's troops defecting if it wanted to, and if it had a robust defector program in place. 420,000 is less than the number of refugees that NATO is already coping with. The UN Refugee Agency, known as UNHCR, tracks refugees around the world. It reports that there have been 6.3 million refugees from Ukraine globally as of June 2023, most of whom have headed for NATO countries or passed through them. 420,000 defectors is an order of magnitude less than the refugees that NATO countries are already coping with. A defector program could also be less expensive than other military expenditures. For example, a single Javelin anti-tank missile can cost over $200,000 US. Say that the cost per defector can be kept below $60,000. There are 3 crew in a Russian tank. That comes to $180,000. Getting a Russian tank crew to defect could be less expensive than blowing up the tank. Furthermore, we could capture a multi-million-dollar tank as part of the bargain. So it might even be possible to make a profit on some defections. Another example is from my home country, Canada. Canada is purchasing 88 F-35 fighter jets for 19 billion Canadian dollars, which works out to 14 billion US. Recall that 420,000 defectors divided among 32 NATO countries is about 13,000 defectors per country. $14 billion divided among 13,000 defectors is over $1 million per defector. If Canada were to give $14 billion to its 13,000 defectors, they could all retire to a beach in Mexico. Chances are that a defector program will cost a lot less than $1 million per defector. So even if every Russian soldier were to defect, a defector program might still be easier and cheaper than what NATO is already doing. However, not every soldier is going to defect. In fact, most probably won't. Even so, there are at least 3 ways that small numbers of defectors could drive Putin out of Ukraine. First, defections could reduce the effectiveness of Putin's army to a point where he cannot carry on the war. Putin's army is pretty ineffective as it is. Even small numbers of defectors could potentially push it over the edge. Second, defections could undermine Putin's government. During the Vietnam War, there were about 570,000 draft offenders. However, the number of draft dodgers was only 17% the size of the number who served. Yet this 17% was enough to undermine the government and the war effort. No doubt, Putin would feel significant heat if 17% of his soldiers defected. Thirdly, and finally, if Putin sees that defections could push his army over the edge or topple his government, he might decide to declare victory and leave before it happens. Getting Putin to decide to leave on his own is the best of the three options. There is almost no chance of nuclear war because Putin is leaving voluntarily. It will also tend to happen faster than the other two options because Putin has to leave well before his army or government collapse to save face effectively. Putin is bound to be paranoid about defections. As a former KGB officer, it was Putin's job to guard against people defecting. And as a dictator and student of Russian history, he knows soldiers defecting to the other side can overturn governments. Though few soldiers may actually defect, every soldier will probably think about it. And the longer the war goes on, the more time they will have to think. Putin will know it and fear it. NATO could play on his paranoia to prompt him to leave sooner. For example, NATO could ask Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine if they want to defect. Say, for the sake of argument, 50% of 10,000 prisoners express interest. NATO could infer that 50% of Putin's entire army may also consider defecting. This could scare the hell out of Putin. The number of defectors per NATO country could be very small. Say that NATO asks 10,000 prisoners if they want to defect, and 50% say yes. 50% of 10,000 prisoners is 5,000. 5,000 divided among 32 NATO countries is less than 157 defectors per NATO country. This is tiny. Any country, no matter how small, can handle 157 defectors. And it could really play on Putin's mind. Defections are less dangerous because they are a peaceful form of pushback. It is Putin's own soldiers who are deciding to defect, so it is hard for him to blame NATO. Defections also make Putin look weak, which is embarrassing to him, so he may not acknowledge that defections are having any effect. And if he doesn't acknowledge that defections are a problem, he can't use them as an excuse to escalate the war. A defection program has other advantages. It could be used in periods of peace, relieve Ukraine of some of its prisoners of war, and it could bolster Ukraine's I Want to Live program. I Want to Live helps Russian soldiers arrange a safe surrender. A defector program could help entice more Russians to give up fighting. Rather than becoming a prisoner of war, defectors could lead a normal life in a peaceful, democratic country. I Want to Live could be changed up to I Want a Good Life, without Putin in it. A defector program could also help keep the pressure on Putin during ceasefires and negotiations. Thus, it could strengthen Ukraine's negotiating position. Furthermore, it could provide Russian soldiers with a safe way to protest. Protesting against Putin is dangerous. Once Russian defectors are in the West, it is safer for them to call out Putin's aggression, corruption, and incompetence. Defecting itself is a powerful form of protest. In effect, defectors are turning their backs on Putin and his regime, and Putin will absolutely know it and feel it. Last but not least, it is the right thing to do. Russian soldiers didn't choose to start this war. They are victims too. Furthermore, Putin is not the only tyrant with nuclear weapons that we will have to deal with. We need to develop defector programs and other safe ways to handle them. A defector program does not preclude other means of fighting Putin. NATO should continue sending weapons and supplies to Ukraine and placing sanctions on Russia. However, a defector program is a necessary addition to NATO's efforts to stop Putin. So, it seems obvious to me that NATO should have a defector program. But what do you think? Please leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and give it a thumbs up or thumbs down to let me know if you liked it or not. If you want to be notified of future videos on this topic, subscribe and click the bell icon. This YouTube channel will be dedicated to defector program videos and nothing else. so you will not be bothered by videos on other topics if you subscribe. Thank you for your time and attention.